They said he was born during a blood moon, and that the flames that took his home came minutes after his first breath. They said his crying made the horses bolt, the cattle scatter, and the dogs whimper for 3 nights straight. By the time he could walk, 2 men had died within a day of crossing his path. No one knew his real name, just the stories. And those stories traveled faster than wagons or wire. In towns held together by superstition and dry wood, that was enough. Colt McCrae didn't buy into ghost tales. He believed in tracks on the ground, truth in the eyes, and the kind of trouble you could see coming down a ridge. But what he saw that morning didn't fit any of that. A boy stood alone beside the freight depot, barefoot, shirt soaked through with something darker than water. His face was streaked with dust and what might have been blood. He didn't cry, didn't call for anyone, just stood there like something had already decided he'd be forgotten. Colt stepped down from his wagon slow. The whole town had gone still. Windows shuttered, doors half closed, like everyone was watching but no one would admit it. Colt felt the eyes, but he didn't slow. He crossed the road and knelt down, keeping his voice low. "You hurt?" he asked. The boy didn't answer, just blinked once. Colt could see the bruise under his eye, the split at his lip, the way his hands trembled even though the sun was high. "You got a name?" Colt asked. After a long pause, the boy whispered, "Aben." "You hungry, Aben?" Aben nodded, just once. Someone across the street called out, "Leave him be, McCrae. That one ain't right." Colt didn't flinch, didn't look away from the boy. "What happened to you?" he asked. The boy glanced at his own feet. "They said I was cursed. Said I brought sickness to the well. So they sent me away." Colt stood slowly, not out of shock, out of anger so quiet it barely moved his face. "Well," he said, "some folks see thunder where there's just sky." He took off his coat and draped it over the boy's shoulders. Then he led him to the wagon, helped him climb up, and said nothing else. They rode north, out of town, away from whispers. The sun dipped lower behind them, and the road turned from dirt to gravel to the dry silence of open land. Aben didn't speak again, just watched the horizon like he didn't trust it not to move. By the time they reached Colt's land, the wind had picked up. A long barn, weather-worn but solid, stood against the dusk. The house beside it had one light glowing behind faded curtains. Colt handed the boy a canteen and opened the barn door. "You sleep here tonight. There's straw and the stove's still warm. I'll bring food." Aben didn't ask questions, didn't thank him. Just sat down, back to the wall, eyes on the floor, like he was used to vanishing. Colt watched him a moment longer, then turned and walked back toward the house. That night, the wind didn't howl. It whispered. Through cracks in the wood and under the eaves, like it was warning something had changed. And Colt, lying awake in the dark, couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just opened a door that wouldn't close again. The next morning came with frost on the window glass and silence so complete it rang in Colt's ears. He stepped outside with a tin mug in one hand and his coat half buttoned. The land stretched out in every direction, pale, empty, holding its breath like something was about to arrive. He didn't expect to see Aben already up, crouched beside the fence post, feeding scraps of hay to the old mule. Barefoot still, but more alert. When Colt approached, the boy looked up and said, "She likes the sweet bits." Colt nodded. "So do I." He handed him half a biscuit from the morning's pan. Aben took it with both hands like it might disappear. They stood there chewing in quiet, watching the frost melt from the rail. Later that day, Colt took the boy into town for supplies. Not because they needed flour, they didn't, but because he wanted folks to see, to notice, to know the boy wasn't alone anymore. The general store went silent the moment they stepped inside. A woman by the bolts of fabric turned her back. A man near the dry goods muttered something under his breath and left. Only the clerk, a thin man named Cyrus, offered anything like warmth. Colt kept his voice steady. "Need oats, sugar, maybe a pair of boots if you got 'em small." Cyrus nodded. "Kid yours?" "Close enough." The clerk didn't ask more, just wrapped the goods and rang the bell at the counter. Aben stood still the whole time, eyes fixed on the row of jars behind the register. Licorice, peppermints, jawbreakers. When Colt noticed, he added a scoop of peppermint to the pile. Back at the ranch, the mood had changed. Not loud, not sharp, just heavier, like the air was thicker around the edges. That night, Colt showed Aben how to patch a saddle strap. The boy's fingers were slow but careful. After a while he asked, "Why'd you take me?" Colt didn't look up, just kept threading the needle. "Because someone should have," he said. "Even if I bring bad luck?" Colt paused. "I don't believe in luck, only choices." Aben fell quiet again. The next few days passed in small routines, feeding the animals, sweeping the porch, warming stones near the stove to place at the foot of the bedroll. Aben didn't speak much, but he started humming while he worked. A tune Colt didn't recognize, lilting and strange, like something from another world. Then came the knock. It was just after sunset. Colt had been splitting kindling near the barn. The sound wasn't loud, but it carried. 3 measured raps. He wiped his hands and opened the door. 2 men stood outside. Town men. One wore a deputy's star half hidden by his coat. The other had a shotgun slung across his back, though his hands were empty. "We came to talk," the deputy said. Colt didn't move. "Then talk." "That boy," the other man said. "Folks say he ain't right. There's been fires, illness. You seen the preacher's wife?" Colt's jaw tightened. "I've seen people blame what they don't understand." The deputy stepped forward. "We're not here to take him. Yet. But you keep him here and things go south, it'll be on you." "I sleep fine," Colt said. The men left without pushing further, but their eyes held promise. Not the good kind. Colt closed the door and locked it. Behind him, Aben stood at the edge of the kitchen, small frame silhouetted by the firelight. "I heard," he said. Colt turned to him. "Let 'em talk." Aben's voice trembled. "They always come back. Always." Colt stepped closer, knelt down and said, "Not while I'm standing." That night, the wind picked up again, louder this time, like it had teeth. The next morning came heavy with fog, the kind that clung to the skin and made sound travel in strange ways. It rolled in low across the fields, wrapped itself around the fence posts, and made the world feel smaller somehow, like everything past 100 yards just stopped. Colt stood on the porch, coffee in one hand, the other resting loosely on his hip. He watched the gray drift between the barn and the corral, slow and silent. Inside, Aben was already awake, sitting cross-legged on the floor, sorting through nails with a level of care Colt hadn't asked for. The boy worked like someone twice his age, not fast, but focused, trying to prove something. Maybe to himself, maybe to the man who'd taken him in, maybe to something bigger. After breakfast, they went to work mending the shed wall. A storm days earlier had loosened 2 boards, and the last thing Colt needed was more wildlife sniffing around the feed bins. Aben held the wood in place while Colt hammered. He didn't need to be told when to move, when to duck, when to step back. He watched, learned, mirrored, and when Colt offered him the hammer, he didn't hesitate. By midday the fog had burned off. The sun came through just enough to warm the ground, and the sky opened up into one of those wide, cloudless blues that made you think maybe things were starting to shift. Not get better. Colt didn't believe in that. But shift. And sometimes that was enough. He took Aben down to the lower pasture where a broken gate leaned sideways like a drunk who'd given up. Together they hoisted it, set new hinges, and braced the post with stone and dry cement. It was quiet work, but not tense. Just two people with their heads down and their hands busy. When they took a break, Colt pulled a tin from his coat and handed Aben a piece of jerky. The boy nodded in thanks, then asked, "Why do you fix things alone?" Colt looked at him. "Same reason I eat alone. Harder to break what you don't share." Aben didn't respond, just chewed. They headed back toward the barn with the sun hanging low, painting everything gold. At the top of the ridge, Colt paused. Something didn't sit right. Not fear, not exactly, but that feeling in the gut that says the land's been holding its breath too long. Sure enough, when they reached the barn, there was a man waiting. Not near the house, not on the road, just standing in the field. Long coat, wide hat. Didn't move when they approached. Colt stepped forward, slow. "You lost?" he called. The man didn't answer, just raised one hand, palm out, and pointed west. Then he turned and walked away. Colt didn't follow. He watched the figure until it disappeared beyond the hill, then looked down at Aben, who was staring in the same direction. "You know him?" "No," the boy said, but his voice was hollow, unsure. That night, the wind picked up. It tapped at the windows, scratched across the roof, and moaned through the trees like something unsettled. Colt sat by the stove, rifle nearby, and watched the flames flicker in the low light. Aben spoke, unprompted. "They said I cursed a man," he whispered, "that I touched his hand, and 3 days later, he died." Colt didn't say anything for a moment. Then, "Did you?" "No," the boy said. Then softer, "But he did die." Colt leaned back in his chair. "People die, kid. Sometimes with reason. Sometimes without. The ones who stay, they make up stories to sleep better." Aben stared at the fire. "Do you believe that?" "I've seen worse truths." Outside, the wind howled. But inside, for the first time in days, the silence didn't feel so heavy. The days that followed were quiet, but not in the usual way. It wasn't the peaceful kind of silence a man earns after a day's labor. This was a different stillness, one that made the skin prickle. Even the birds seemed to steer clear of the ridge behind the barn. Aben noticed it too. He didn't say much, but he moved slower, listened more, kept the fire going longer at night. Colt didn't question it. He'd learned not to dismiss the instincts of children who'd seen too much. Instead, he put the boy to work, mending fence posts, checking traps, hauling water from the creek. They didn't talk often, but when they did, Aben's questions came sharp and sudden. "Why don't cows panic like horses? Do you ever shoot to scare? How do you know when a storm's coming before the sky changes?" Colt answered plainly, without stories. Aben listened like every word was something he might need to survive. One morning they found a coyote caught in the wire snare. Its leg was bloodied, eyes wide and glassy. Colt approached slow, knife in hand. "You gonna kill it?" Aben asked. "Not if I don't have to," Colt muttered. He knelt beside the animal, careful not to spook it, and cut the wire loose. The coyote limped off, not even looking back. Aben watched it disappear into the grass, then looked up at Colt. "Why'd you let it go?" Colt shrugged. "It wasn't trying to hurt no one, just hungry." That night the wind returned, not strong, but strange. It came from the west, low and steady, like it was carrying a whisper from far off. Colt sat outside after dark, watching the tree line, rifle across his lap. Something felt off. No moon, no stars. Just that wind curling through the grass like it knew where it was going. When he came back in, Aben was still awake. "You feel it too?" the boy asked. Colt didn't answer. Just added a log to the stove and locked the door with care. At dawn they found tracks near the back fence. Not hoof prints, not boots. Just wide impressions, deep and even, like something heavy had walked there without trying to hide. The prints didn't lead anywhere. They just appeared, stopped, then vanished. Colt crouched beside one. "Could be bear," he muttered. But he didn't believe it. Aben stood beside him, eyes fixed on the hills. "They're watching," he said softly. "Not just me. You too." Colt didn't respond. He just stood, brushed off his hands, and went to check the rifle again. The following day started clear and cold. Frost clung to the brush, and the grass crunched underfoot as Colt led the mule down to the stream. Aben trailed behind, eyes darting along the ridgeline. He hadn't said a word since they found those prints. Whatever he thought they were, he kept it to himself. But he stayed closer now, never more than a few steps behind. By mid-morning, clouds had rolled in, low, dark, and heavy. Colt could smell snow in them. He and Aben worked quick to haul firewood to the barn, stack it, cover it, make sure everything that needed to be inside was inside. He checked the hinges on the door twice, then slid the rifle to its usual place beside the cot. When he looked up, Aben was standing near the stove, arms folded tight across his chest. "I know what those prints were," the boy said. Colt waited. "They come before the drumming," Aben added. "Back home I heard it twice, once before the raid, once before the fire." Colt felt his throat tighten, but he kept his voice calm. "You think they're close?" Aben nodded. "They don't follow like men. They wait. Then they surround." Colt glanced out the window. Snow had begun to fall, light but steady. He pulled the bolt shut. "All right," he said. "We stay put tonight." They didn't eat much that evening, just boiled beans and old cornbread. The silence between them was heavier than any snow on the roof. Even the mule was quiet, ears twitching now and then like it was listening for something out beyond the trees. Later, after the stove had burned down to coals, Colt lay on the cot with the rifle beside him. Aben curled on the floor, wrapped tight in a wool blanket. Outside, the wind moaned through the barn slats, and something, somewhere, tapped against the side wall. Just once. Not a branch, not an animal, something deliberate. Colt didn't move, didn't breathe. Aben sat up slowly, eyes wide, and whispered, "They're here." Colt didn't sleep that night. Not really. He kept one ear tuned to every shift in the wind, every creak in the rafters. At one point he thought he heard the soft crunch of snow just outside the door, but when he looked, there was nothing there. Still, he kept the rifle in hand, resting across his knees, while the fire in the stove hissed and popped, throwing uneven shadows across the barn walls. Aben stayed on the floor, not quite asleep either. His eyes opened at intervals, scanning the dark like he expected someone, or something, to step out of it. At some point past midnight the wind changed. It didn't howl anymore. It dropped low, like it was holding its breath, and in that breathless quiet, Colt heard it, a drumbeat, soft, slow, just once. Then again, a little louder. He stood, moved to the window, lifted the corner of the oilcloth. Snow still fell, gently now. But down the slope near the tree line, there were torches. 4. No, 5. They flickered like fireflies, held high in hands that didn't move. Figures stood behind them, cloaked in dark shapes Colt couldn't make out. He didn't raise the rifle, not yet. Just watched. Behind him, Aben whispered, "That's not them." Colt turned. "What do you mean?" "They're not the ones who follow, not the ones from before. These are different." The boy got to his feet slowly, walked to the window, and stood beside Colt. "These come before decisions. They don't take, they test." Colt studied the line of figures. They didn't move, just stood still in the falling snow like carved posts, like they'd always been there. "What kind of test?" he asked. But Aben didn't answer. He just stared harder, as if trying to read something in the torchlight the rest of the world couldn't see. Suddenly, one of the torches dropped. Not fell, was placed, gently, and the figure behind it stepped forward, slowly, hands visible, empty. Colt still didn't raise the rifle. Not because he wasn't scared, but because something about the air told him this moment wasn't made for bullets. The figure stopped 20 feet from the barn and knelt, placing something in the snow, then turned and walked away. When the torches vanished, Colt and Aben stepped outside. The cold bit deep, but neither of them flinched. They walked to the spot where the figure had knelt. In the snow was a bundle, wrapped in hide, tied with sinew. Colt knelt and picked it up. Inside was a braid of black hair, a wooden figure carved with 3 notches, and a flat stone marked with a crude symbol, one Colt didn't recognize. "What is it?" he asked. Aben's voice was barely a breath. "They're asking who I belong to." Colt looked at him. "And what you'll do about it." Colt didn't say anything at first. He just held the bundle in his hands, turning it slowly, the carved figure catching the light of the rising sun. The hair braid was bound with a red thread, frayed at the edge like it had been torn free. The stone, round, flat, etched, felt cold in his palm, colder than the snow around them. He and Aben sat on the edge of the barn's porch watching the tree line. The torches were long gone. So were the figures. But their presence lingered, like the scent of smoke that stays after a fire's died. "They want to see if you'll claim me," Aben said finally. "Claim you?" The boy nodded. "Make it known. Say I belong here." Colt looked down at the bundle again. "And if I don't?" "They'll come back. And next time they'll decide for you." It wasn't a threat. Not in his voice. Just a truth spoken soft. Colt stood. He carried the bundle to the edge of the pasture where a cedar post stuck out of the snow, split down one side from age. He tied the braid to the post with the red thread, nestled the carved figure into a crack in the wood, set the stone flat at the base where it could be seen but not kicked away. When he stepped back, Aben had followed. "They'll see that," the boy said. "Good," Colt replied. "I want them to." They walked back to the barn in silence. Later that afternoon, while Aben shelled beans into a bucket, Colt took an old scrap of canvas and painted 3 lines across it. 1 tall, 2 short. He didn't know what it meant, not exactly, but it felt right. He nailed it to the front of the barn just beneath the eave, a mark maybe, or a promise. That night, the wind returned, not cruel, not biting, but steady. The kind that carries voices across open land, if you know how to listen. And Colt, sitting by the stove with Aben curled in the cot nearby, listened. The fire popped once, then twice, and then nothing but the hum of night. If you're still with us, let us know in the comments where in the world you're listening from. We'd love to hear how far the Silent West travels. In the dark, outside the barn, the wind carried no footsteps. But it felt like something had seen. And maybe something had shifted. The snow began to melt in patches 2 days later, revealing slivers of brown earth and trampled straw beneath. Colt had taken to checking the ridge each morning, riding slow and scanning the horizon like a man waiting for something he couldn't name. He didn't say much to Aben, not out of distance, but because there wasn't much to say. Some truths hang heavier in silence. That morning, the sun hit the barn roof for the first time in weeks. Steam rose from the shingles, curling like breath from tired lungs. Aben stood near the fence, watching a pair of crows pick through the leftover hay. He still didn't talk much, but he moved different now. Not fast, not loose, but not like he was bracing for a blow every second. Colt hammered in a loose board near the gate. When it held, he leaned on it, wiping his brow, and said, "You ever build something before?" Aben shook his head. "Just took things apart." Colt nodded once. "Well, reckon you'll learn the other side of it here." They spent the rest of the morning repairing the paddock. Aben fetched nails, held boards, handed over the hammer without needing to be asked. At one point, he looked up and said, "Why'd you take me in?" Colt didn't answer right away. He looked over the field, watching the wind ripple across the thawing snow. "Seemed like you'd already been left out enough." Aben didn't say anything, but he handed him the next board without looking down, and Colt noticed his grip didn't tremble this time. That night, while the stew boiled and the fire cast shadows across the rafters, a sound echoed from beyond the trees. Not drums, not hooves, something closer. A whistle, long, low, almost human. Colt stood, reached for the rifle, but didn't raise it. Aben hadn't flinched. He just looked toward the door, then back to Colt. "You expecting anyone?" the boy asked. Colt shook his head. "Nope." They waited in silence. Nothing came. The wind pressed against the barn like a question left hanging. Whatever had called out wasn't asking permission. It was just letting them know it still remembered. The next day brought cloud cover, thick and low, dragging the light down to a dull silver. Colt woke early, boots already half-laced when he heard it. A crow's call, sharp and too close. He stepped outside with the rifle in hand and scanned the tree line. Nothing moved. But he knew better than to trust a quiet morning. Inside, Aben had already stoked the fire and was pouring water into the tin pot. "Something wrong?" he asked without turning around. "Just watchful," Colt said. "Some mornings feel off, like the land's holding its breath." They ate in silence. Afterward, Aben followed Colt out to the ridge. The boy didn't ask why. They both knew why. The snow was thinner up top, and Colt could see the plains stretch out like an old scar. A single track cut across it, faint but fresh. Someone had passed through in the night. He knelt beside it, pressing gloved fingers to the indent in the thawing earth. "Too light for a rider," he muttered, "but not a coyote." Aben crouched beside him. "You think it's them?" "Could be. Could be someone worse." They followed the track halfway down the hill before it vanished into old brush and frozen mud. Colt didn't like that. A vanishing trail meant a watcher, not a traveler. Back at the barn, he checked the latches again, tightened the hinges, cleaned the rifle. Aben sat near the stove, sharpening an old knife Colt had given him. There was a rhythm to it now. Preparation, not panic. Action, not fear. Just before nightfall, a figure appeared on the edge of the clearing, walking slow, alone, wrapped in tattered wool and shadow. Colt stepped outside, rifle low but ready. The figure stopped 10 paces short. "You the man took in the cursed boy?" the stranger called, voice like gravel. Colt didn't answer. Didn't need to. "You're being watched," the man said. "They don't take kindly to kindness." Then he turned and walked back into the woods, leaving only silence and a single boot print melting in the snow. Colt stood still for a long while before speaking. "Well," he muttered, "that just about answers that." That night, the wind shifted. Not a storm, not a howl, just the kind of change that made windows creak and horses lift their heads. Colt sat near the fire, boots off, rifle within arm's reach. Aben had gone quiet, curling beneath the quilt with eyes wide open. He wasn't scared, not exactly, but something in the air felt familiar, heavy. "What do you remember?" Colt asked finally, his voice low. Aben didn't move at first. Then he said, "A clearing, big fire, people I didn't know." "People who hurt you?" The boy nodded slowly. Colt leaned back in the chair watching the flames. "They don't get to have you back." No more words passed between them, just the slow settling of the barn around them, and the wind brushing against the walls like it was looking for a way in. The next morning, Colt found another set of prints in the snow. Not one set, 3. They hadn't come close, just circled the edge of the clearing and faded back into the woods. He didn't say anything to Abin, just loaded more rounds into the rifle and checked the barn doors a second time. By noon, a rider approached. This one wasn't hiding. Tall, thin, clean coat, but eyes like dried bone. He stopped his horse 10 feet from the porch and raised a hand. "Name's Kastner," he said. "Heard you were harboring something dangerous." Colt stepped off the porch, not rushing. "Boy's not a danger to anyone." Kastner's smile didn't reach his eyes. "That's not what folks are saying." "Well," Colt said, "you tell those folks they're wrong." Kastner tilted his head. "You sure you want to pick this fight, rancher?" Colt didn't blink. "Already did." They stood in silence for a long second. Then Kastner nodded once, turned his horse, and rode off without another word. But Colt knew what that meant. This wasn't over. Not yet. And if you're still listening, tell us where in the world you're tuning in from. We'd love to hear in the comments. That night they didn't light the fire. Colt didn't say why, but Abin didn't ask. They sat in the dark, the barn lit only by slivers of moonlight slipping through the slats. The quiet was thick, not fearful, just tense, like the land was waiting on something. Just after midnight the horse snorted. Then a knock, 3 taps, slow, on the outer barn door. Colt moved without a sound, rifle already in hand. He cracked the door open an inch. A woman stood there, alone, wrapped in a thick shawl, face lined by cold and time. Behind her, 4 others waited in the dark. They didn't step forward. Colt didn't lower the rifle, but he opened the door wider. "I came for the boy," the woman said. Abin stepped out from behind him. When she saw him, she didn't speak right away, just looked at him long, like trying to measure what time had done. Then she knelt, held out both hands. Abin didn't run to her. He just walked, slow, measured, then stopped inches away. "You remember me?" she asked. He nodded. "You fed me, before they came." Her hands trembled as they took his. "I'm your mother's sister," she said. "I couldn't stop what they did, but I kept looking." Colt watched, silent. She looked up at him. "They said he was cursed, that he brought ruin, but he didn't. The curse was what they did, not him." Colt nodded once. "He's safe now, stronger than when I found him." She rose, holding Abin's hand. "We'd like to take him home, if he wants to come." Colt looked at the boy. "It's your call." Abin looked back, eyes steady. "Will I see you again?" Colt smiled faintly. "Doors open, always." Abin nodded, then stepped out into the cold. Didn't look back. They rode off before dawn. No torches, no fanfare. Just quiet footsteps on frozen earth. Colt stood in the doorway until long after they disappeared. When the sun finally rose, it hit the land soft and pale. Inside the barn, Colt set the empty mug on the table. No sound except the wind, and maybe a bird somewhere out past the fence line. He looked around. Quilt folded, cup washed, cot empty. And still, the place didn't feel hollow. It felt earned. And if this story meant something to you, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. And thank you, as always, for riding with us out here in the Silent West Stories.